heart strong. Jesus, keep me from all wrong. I'll be satisfied as long as I walk, dear Lord, close to Thee. Just a closer walk with Thee. Grant it, Jesus, is my plea. Daily walking close to Thee. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be. Through this world of toil and snares, if I falter, Lord, who cares? Who with me my burden shares? None but Thee, dear Lord, none but Thee. Just a closer walk with Thee. Grant it, Jesus, is my plea. Daily walking close to Thee. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be. When my feeble life is o'er, time for me will be no more. Guide me gently, safely o'er to Thy kingdom shore, to Thy shore. Just a closer walk with Thee. Grant it, Jesus, is my
Let's turn to Mark chapter 3. Mark chapter 3, we'll read to begin with verses 7 through 21. This was a portion of the reading from the 21st of this month. Mark 3, verses 7 through 21. The Bible says, Jesus withdrew with his disciples to the sea, and a great crowd followed from Galilee and Judea and Jerusalem and Idumea, from beyond the Jordan and from around Tyre and Sidon. When the great crowd heard all that he was doing, they came to him. And he told his disciples to have a boat ready for him, because the crowd, lest they should crush him. For he had healed many, so that all who had diseases pressed around him to touch him. Whenever the unclean spirits saw him, they fell down before him and cried out, "You are the Son of God." And he strictly ordered them not to make him known. And he went up on the mountain and called to him those whom he desired, and they came to him. And he appointed 12, whom he also named apostles, so that they might be with him, and he might send them out to preach, have authority to cast out demons. He appointed the 12, Simon, to whom he gave the name Peter, James the son of Zebedee, and John the brother of James, to whom he gave the name Boanerges, that is, sons of thunder, Andrew and Philip and Bartholomew and Matthew and Thomas and James the son of Alphaeus and Thaddeus and Simon the Zealot and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. Then he went home, and the crowd gathered again, so that they could not even eat. And when his family heard it, they went out to seize him, for they were saying, "He is out of his mind." Now, this passage on the surface, just in a casual reading of it, seems to be a kind of disjunct passage dealing with several different independent scenes from the story of Jesus. This scene of him healing some folks, this scene of him calling and setting apart the 12, and then this scene of him at his home that don't really seem to be associated with one another. However, when I look at this, I see some contrasting associations with Jesus being brought out. If you'll recall, when we studied the book of Mark, a lot of what we noticed in Mark's gospel was this effort to contrast things. And I think that that's kind of what's going on here. And I want to lay out a case this evening that not every relationship with Christ is equal. All of the people involved in this, and by the way, I'm going to skip over the demons. You could add the demons to this discussion too as well. All of these have a relationship with Christ in some form or fashion. And it's contrasting those relationships, and it's because it matters what kind of relationship we have. And so I want to turn our attention to the curious. This group of people that came to Jesus because they were curious. And so the text tells us about this great crowd that came to him. It says that they followed from Galilee and from Judea and from Jerusalem and from Idumea and from beyond the Jordan and from around Tyre and Sidon. There's a bunch of them, and we like big crowds. We were talking about that just before services. A lot of times we judge the health of a congregation based on how many people are in the seats. We like crowds. We like this idea of crowds coming from all over. There are a bunch of these folks, and this is from a wide area. I want to talk a little bit about these places that are named. Galilee. This is the region in Israel that's up in the north, that is up around the Sea of Galilee. It includes cities like Nazareth and Capernaum, both that you hear about a lot. Obviously Nazareth, because that is where Jesus and his family lived. Then it mentions Judea, and this is a region of Israel that is south of Galilee, and it includes places like Jerusalem, which is the next thing on the list, is the city of Jerusalem. Now, it's quite important. It was a large city. It was the capital city. It's where the temple was. And so it was of great significance, not just culturally, but religiously in ancient Israel. And so there are people coming from Jerusalem. Then it talks about Idumea, and this is a region which is even south of Judea. It is... It was inhabited primarily by the Edomites, and in the Roman period, it was known for being ethnically diverse and for having this mixed population. And so we're talking about people of different ethnicities that were traveling from way down here in Idumea to go and hear Jesus and hear what he has to say and see him. Then it talks about the regions beyond the Jordan. Those are those places east of the Jordan River. Israel was everything west of the Jordan River to the sea. We're talking about the stuff on the east side of the river. This is an area that became known as Perea. It was part of the territory of Herod Antipas during this time frame. Then it mentions Tyre and Sidon. These are coastal cities that are way up in Phoenicia, kind of northwest of Galilee. And these were major centers of trade and major centers of culture, and they were predominantly, I guess I should say, Gentile cities. And so we have to kind of conclude that more than likely some of these people that were traveling to hear Jesus were Gentiles. Now, if you were to take a circle and draw it on a map to encompass all of these areas, you would be dealing with a circle that has about a 100-mile radius to actually capture all of these areas. Now, I could throw a map up on the board that has Judea and has all these places named, but you really wouldn't get a feel for the distance we're talking about. So what I decided to do was make a map of Louisiana. And I put the center of the circle in Alexandria. I actually had put the center of the circle in Lafayette to begin with, but the problem is about the bottom third of the circle was in the Gulf of Mexico, and you lose the scale. So I moved it to Alexandria so you could get a sense of just how big a region we're talking about. And so this area reaches up almost to the northern border of Louisiana with Arkansas. It comes a little short of that. I'm not sure if it quite gets up to Haynesville or not in those areas, but close. Close to Monroe, close to Shreveport and Bossier and those areas. Going south, all the way down south of Lake Charles, almost to the coastline. Going east as far over as Baton Rouge in those areas, and up a little higher north of that into western Mississippi, including places like Macomb and some of those other cities. And then on the west side of the circle, reaching into East Texas, all the way to places like Brooklyn and Pineland, which is where Larry Bilbo is living, and Jasper, and maybe into Newton County a little bit. I would have to actually look real close on the map to determine that. But anyway, those are the areas. This is an area 100 miles on either side of Alexandria, 100 miles north to south of Alexandria. And what we see here is it covers most of the state of Louisiana, a big percentage of the state of Louisiana. That's how far people were going to see Jesus. That's where all these people are coming from. All of these many people are traveling these great distances, and you might think that they have to be serious followers of Jesus. Why would they travel so far? Well, the next verse actually tells us why they came. When the great crowd heard all that he was doing, they came to him. So the reason they were there is because they had heard about what Jesus was doing. Now, the question that I immediately asked when I read that was, well, what did they hear he was doing? And the best way to answer that question is to look back at the kinds of things that Mark had already recorded in this gospel. And so you go back to chapter 1, verses 21 through 28, and you find him teaching in the synagogue and casting out a demon there. And then after that, starting in verse 29 and following, he heals Peter's mother-in-law and many others on that occasion. In verse 35 of chapter 1 and on to 39, he's preaching and he's healing throughout the region of Galilee. In verse 40 to 45, he cleanses a leper. In Mark chapter 2, verses 1 through 12, he heals a paralytic. And then starting in verse 13 and going to verse 17 is when we have the calling of the publican Levi. And then Jesus goes actually to Levi's house and eats with a bunch of sinners. And that causes quite a stir when he does that. In verse 18 of Mark 2, you see him teaching about fasting. And then starting in 23 and going through verse 28, his disciples are plucking grain on the Sabbath, and that causes quite a stir. And then chapter 3 opens with him healing a man with a withered hand on the Sabbath, which causes an even bigger stir. And that is the last thing that Mark records before he talks about this big crowd who came because they heard what he was doing. And so I have to kind of believe that since Mark records these types of events, that these are the things that are being talked about when it says that they were hearing the things that he was doing. So what was he doing? Well, he was teaching and preaching and cleansing and healing and calling people to himself and teaching them about fasting and teaching them about the Sabbath and demonstrating for them in some very controversial ways about how to properly understand the Sabbath and how they were not properly understanding the Sabbath. So there's signs that involved healings and miracles that he's working. There are teachings and behaviors that were controversial to the establishment, and a lot of challenges to the status quo. That's what was going on. And these are the kinds of things that actually do stir up the curiosity of men. And that is what's being talked about here. People wanted to come see the show. They heard about the healings. They wanted to see it. Some of them came because they wanted to be healed themselves. Notice Jesus' reaction to all this, though. He told his disciples to have a boat ready for him because of the crowd. So this huge crowd is coming to him, and he looks to his disciples and says, go get a boat. We got to get out of here. What's that really all about? Well, the text tells us he had healed many so that all who had diseases pressed around him to touch him. So he had healed a lot of folks, and there were a lot of people coming that wanted to touch him because of that. And they were pressing around him, and he's like, I've got to get out of here. They wanted to be healed themselves or to see someone else here healed. What's really going on here is they're curious. But Jesus is planning his escape because they weren't seeking him to be saved. They only wanted to be delivered from their fleshly infirmities or satisfy their curiosity. That is the first group I want you to think about, the curious. Listen, we got those kind of people today too. They're curious. We'll talk about that more in just a little while. The next group we want to talk about are the committed. That is what this middle scene is of the disciples, and particularly those that he called to himself up on the mountain. These 12 individuals that he calls to himself from among the disciples who were with him. And the disciples are a different group than the crowd. The disciples are always put forth as a different group than the crowd. And we don't know exactly how many disciples there were in total at this point. Later on, we would be told that they numbered around 120. By the end of the Gospels and going into the first part of Acts, there was about 120 disciples of Jesus that were following him around. And from among that group are the 12 who would be sent out as apostles. These are identified here. These 12 men. There's a very different relationship among these disciples and the curious crowds that we've been looking at up to this point in the lesson. Completely different reason that they're there, completely different response, completely different. The crowds were looking because of curiosity and possibly being able to gain some personal material benefit. We learn about some of these people earlier in the Gospel of Mark. And so you go back to chapter 1 and start reading in verse 16, and it says that Jesus is passing alongside the Sea of Galilee, and he sees Simon and Andrew, the brother of Simon, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And Jesus said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." And it says immediately they left their nets, and they followed him. And going a little farther, he saw James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother, who were in their boat mending nets. And immediately he called them, and they left their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired servants and followed him. And so with this group of people, we're talking about people who left jobs, who left family, who left homes to follow Jesus and listen to what Jesus had to say. As one of them would later put it in chapter 10 and verse 28, he said, "See, we've left everything and followed you." That is a contrast between the big crowds who were just there because of what they heard about him doing. Just there to see or experience a miracle or a healing. These are people that are walking away from their jobs, walking away from their livelihood, walking away from their family, leaving their homes. Following Jesus, listening to his words, repenting, changing their life, not just curious onlookers. They're paying a price for truly repenting, truly pursuing a godly life, the things that Jesus were teaching and saying ought to be done. A very different group. These are people that are committed to God, that are committed to God's Christ, that are committed to the way in which is being taught. The third group that we're introduced to in this text is the chagrined, is what I call them. It says in the scriptures, when his family heard it, they went out to seize him, for they were saying, "He is out of his mind." When his family heard it, when his family heard about what was happening, when they heard about the crowds, when they heard about the crowds coming and pressing on him, so much the text says, so that they couldn't even eat. His family comes out to lay hands on him and take him in, and they tell the crowds, he's crazy. Now, we know that he had a mother. we know that he had 4 brothers and at least 2 sisters in his immediate family. We know that because obviously his mother is named, and we're told about Mary. His brothers are named James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas or Jude. 4 brothers at least, and the Bible simply mentions his sisters, and that is a plural word there. So it's more than one sister, but we don't have an exact number given, and we don't have any names given. So he had at least 6 siblings and a mother. That would have been his immediate family. The word family here, though, could also be a little bit broader word, and some translations actually use the term kinsman here. And so it could have included aunts and uncles and cousins and more extended family. And so what's going on here is that they go out to grab him and they say he's out of his mind. Now, I got to tell you something. I've always taught this and believed that this was a literal statement that they believed about him, that he's gone crazy. Recently, I realized that I'm not real sure there's enough information to conclude that that's exactly what was happening, because I grew up with a brother myself and other family members, and I've been around them, and I've been around them when they've done something that I'm kind of not kosher with. And I'll look at my friends and go, don't pay any attention to him, he's crazy. And it's possible that that's what they're saying to these people, to try to disperse the crowd. Don't pay any attention, there's nothing to see here. He's a little touched in the head, we're going to bring him home. I don't know which one it is. I do know this, and I'm absolutely certain about this. At this point in time, his brothers don't believe in him. John chapter 7 and verse 5 makes that very clear. And so Jesus' family, with all of this that Mark has been talking about, they're chagrined, they're embarrassed, they're exacerbated, they're at their wits' end about the whole scenario. Him going around and teaching people and claiming to have authority and claiming to be the Son of God, and all of these people coming to see, they're just embarrassed and they want it all to go away. And there's some people like that today as well. These are 3 ways of looking at Jesus, and these 3 ways of looking at Jesus are still with us today. There are some people out there who are just casually curious. They read the Bible a little bit. They'll talk to you and have conversations with you about these things. They're interested in learning a little bit about this and a little bit about that and a little bit about this over here, and they'll talk to anybody or the way Paul would talk about it in Athens is they were always interested in hearing something new. Just curious how these Christian people think, curious what these Christian people believe, curious what this is all about. What exactly does the Bible say? They're just curious. And it's a casual relationship with Jesus. They don't see him as being a prophet. They don't see him certainly as being God. And if there's any connection with Christianity at all, it's for what I can get out of it and what it serves my interest. It has nothing to do with them serving God. The world is full of those kind of people. Some think it's all a little crazy. My great-grandmother, who I'll go ahead and tell you, would not attend a church unless it was a Church of Christ. Because, and this is her words, not mine, if any of them are right, it's them. They're following the Bible. But she sat across her living room from me when I was about 17 years old and said, "Do you really believe all this stuff?" I'm just not real sure. It's a little crazy. The idea that Thomas Jefferson had issues with Christianity as it's presented in the New Testament. The supernatural stuff, the miracles, the God on earth thing didn't make a whole lot of sense to him. That was just a little crazy. Now, there was good moral teaching and a lot that was there that was of value as far as he was concerned. But the other stuff, well, they're just a little too far out there. There's a lot of people who think, and if you lived a worldly life and you were converted, and your family are not believers and they are people who are engaged in the various types of immorality and the things that go on in the world, and they drink and they party and they have a good time, and all of a sudden you change your life and you straighten up and you quit doing those things, you know what they'll think about you? He's gone a little crazy. And then some are committed. There are some people in this world who believe to the core of their being, who believe to the point that they are ready to make drastic changes to their life, that they're ready to adjust the way that they think, that they're ready to adjust the way that they live, that though they may not like some of the things that they have to quit doing, they know that they ought to do that and they strive to do it. They are committed to God. They are committed to the way. When they learn something new, they're excited about having learned something new, and they are excited about the prospect of being taught something new. They're committed, like the Christians in Acts chapter 2 that we studied about not long ago, who continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine and into the fellowship, the breaking of bread, and the prayers. They were steadfast in this. They were committed. We have people that are committed today too. Here's the question. Am I among the curious onlookers, not really ready to commit myself to anything? I'm just looking from a distance, keeping an arm's length away from it, trying to see if there's something I can gain from all this. How's it going to make my life better? How's it going to relieve this problem or that problem? Is it going to feed me? There's a scene in the Bible about that too, where Jesus miraculously feeds a group of 5,000 and they follow him, and he turns around and says, "You followed me for the food that perishes, not for the teaching." There are those people who just are curious and they are following and they're interested and they'll listen and they'll come, but they're really asking, how am I going to be served? How is this going to work for me? Is this going to take away my problems and make my life better? And that's what they really want, if they want anything at all. Are you merely an observer? Am I merely an observer? Can I move beyond the miracles and actually seek to understand the teaching? That the miracle was simply a confirmation of. The message was what was important. Can I allow the teaching to have its transformative impact on my life beyond the physical and material things, and say, what does it mean for my soul? And how should I change the way that I think and act about myself and about others? How should I change about my goals in this life? Am I ready to move beyond that? True discipleship involves a commitment and a willingness to change. That's what we saw in those 12 who literally walked away from their fishing nets and boats to follow Jesus. Are we chagrined by doubts and misunderstandings and respond by thinking it's all just a little crazy? There are people like that. It may be some of us or some of our family members. Jesus' own family struggled to understand and accept his mission. And that shows us that doubts and misunderstandings are part of the journey. Now, I'm glad to say that at least some of his brothers, we know, came around. Came to be believers and came to be important and involved and committed members of the church. So those periods of questions and doubts and wondering, That can be part of the journey. If you experience doubts or misunderstandings, my encouragement to you is to use them as an opportunity to grow. Unfortunately, far too many of us, the minute we are faced with a doubt, instead of searching for the answer and trying to find a way to understand, we give up and turn away and say, well, there's just too many questions. We need to seek the answers through study. We need to seek the answers through prayer, through our community and association. We need to be patient with ourselves. We need to be patient with others. This is a process of gaining and maturing into a sincere, committed belief in Christ. We need to create room for that. But that's how we need to view those things. Are you committed? Am I committed? That's the question that we're really asking. Are you holding on to things that hinder your spiritual growth and commitment? Are you walking away from them and holding on to Christ? Hanging on every word. Understanding that his words are the bread of life. Understanding that his teaching is the water of life. The disciples, recall, left their jobs, they left their families, they left their familiar lives to follow Jesus. They exemplify what total commitment to God and his way looks like. And it's radical. Consider what sacrifices or changes that you might need to make in your life to follow Jesus more closely. Find the courage. And I don't know a better word to use. I tried to come up with a better word. Find the courage to implement them as we work together to become devout followers of Jesus. That's what it means to be Christian. The crowds were not Christians. At this point, his family were not Christians. There was a small group of disciples who were committed to everything that Jesus said. They were Christians. Now here's the question. Here's the real question. All of this has been to try to engage you and get you to think about yourself and say, which one of these categories do I more closely represent? Here's the next question, and I'll leave you with this. How does the world see you? If the world listened to you and watched you live, which one of the categories would they put you in? Would they say, well, he's mildly interested and he's there because he wants to hear some things and maybe get some good from it, but he's not committed. And I know he's not committed because I see him on Friday night, or I see him at work and I listen to him talk when he's there and I see how he treats people, and I know he's not really committed, even though he's there. But they look at you and say, well, clearly he thinks it's all a little crazy like I am. I'm going to tell on myself again. I got to get in the habit of doing this. I don't like to do this, but anyway. There was a short period of time in my life that I found myself almost apologizing for things that the church taught. I would be around folks and say, well, yeah, the church teaches this, but I'm not real sure that that's... You know what I was saying? I know that's a little nutty. Luckily, I've come through that. I've learned that some of those things that I once thought weren't so important are actually very important. And that some of those doubts and questions were simply immaturity and lack of knowledge on my part. Would the world put you in the category of thinking that some of the doctrine of the Bible is just a little out there? Or would they look at you and say, look, this guy is committed. I know that he believes. I know that she believes. I know that it's real to them. These people may not even believe themselves, but they can see it in you. And they know whether you're committed. They, in fact, may know which category we fit in better than we ourselves know. A great crowd followed, but there was only a small group that were committed. And that's where we need to be. Lesson's yours for your consideration. Think about these things. And if there's something you need to change and there's some way that we can help you in that, let it be known as we stand and sing.
I am weak, but thou art strong. Jesus, keep me from all wrong. I'll be satisfied as long as I walk, dear Lord, close to thee. Just a closer walk with thee. Granted, Jesus is my plea.